Masechet Pesachim, Daf Lamed Gimel. We're continuing to speak about Terumah. And yesterday we saw a quote from the Sifra, the Midrash Halacha and Sefer Vayikra. We already saw one explanation of it, but we're going to see two more. So let's review what the Sifra says, and then we can appreciate the next two explanations. The Torah says that if someone steals from the Bet HaMikdash, called Meilah, and if he does it bishgaga, if he does it unawares, or maybe better would be negligent. Bishgaga is a mistake, but it's a kind of negligent mistake. So we're going to see is actually there's different levels of making a mistake. If someone leaves the refrigerator door open and then that causes the milk all to go bad, you say, oh, why'd you do that? It's a mistake, but that's kind of negligent. There's other kinds of mistakes where, maybe you're just walking and someone left a glass on the floor. And so, you didn't even intend to do anything at all. So there's some mistakes where you're negligent and other mistakes where you had no idea that you were even doing anything. So you cannot be held accountable. So that's going to be important here. So bishgaga, if someone steals something from the Bet HaMikdash and uses it, if it's by mistake, bishgaga. Why is that to have to say bishgaga? Perat lemezid, not if you do it on purpose. In other words, if someone steals from the Bet HaMikdash on purpose, knowingly, they cannot bring a korban. Bringing a korban is a way of getting atonement. It's actually a privilege that is exclusive for someone who is negligent, not someone who does it on purpose. Otherwise, you'd go and steal on purpose and say, oh, we'll just bring korban later. Okay, so that's what the Midrash says, bishgaga prat lemezid. And now the Sifra continues and say, why does the Torah need to tell me a pasuk that I have to bring a korban only when it's shogeg and not mezid? I could learn the same thing from a kal vachomer. V'halodin huma im shar mitzvot shezedonan karet patar b'hem et hamezid, and other mitzvot where if I do it on purpose, it's a very stringent, it's karet. So other stringent commandments, I don't bring a korban if it's mezid. So Meilah, which is not karet, it's less than karet. So all the more so, it should be more lenient, and I would not have to bring a korban if I did it on purpose. Okay, so that's the question. So then, therefore, why do I need the word bishgaga? I could have learned it from a kal vachomer. The answer is no. I could not have learned it from a kal vachomer. Lo amarta bishar mitzvot shenan ba'avon mita. Other mitzvot are less stringent because they don't have the death penalty. This is mita bidei shamayim. So you're going to say you can't apply that b'meilah shi ba'avon mita hoil v'hi ba'avon mita lo yiftor ba et hamezid. So Meilah has a stringency that is mita b'dei shamayim, and maybe that's why it's more stringent. So other mitzvot, you don't have to bring korban to mezid, but this is more stringent, so maybe you would have to. That's why we need the pasuk bishgaga perat lemezid. Okay, so I just read it from the original Sifra. That's the source. This is what the Talmud quoted yesterday. Now everyone who reads this has an obvious problem because karet in general we understand is to be more stringent than mita b'dei shamayim. Karet means if someone dies over 50, between 50 and 60, we can attribute that to karet in the hands of heaven. However, mita b'dei shamayim is understood to be only 60 and over. So you see that karet is agreed by all to be more stringent, and yet this Sifra takes it both ways. The first half says, yes, karet is more stringent. And the second half, well, yeah, it's true. The other mitzvot don't have mita b'dei shamayim, but they have karet, which is even worse. So the second half does not really fit, does not make any sense. And that was the question we had yesterday. And so we're going to see three explanations. The first one we already saw. It says Meilah has a stringency in that even a smaller minimum size, even less than a kezayit, you would still be liable to bring a korban if you did that by bishgaga. So therefore, Meilah has that extra stringency that there's the minimum size is smaller than for most things. And so what it means here, that bavon mita, you have to kind of fill in words, that even if you have less than the kezayit, it's still avon mita. If you do it on purpose, avon mita. If you do it by mistake, you can bring a korban. So you have to fill in those words, and by filling in those words, then it makes sense. All right, we're going to see now two more answers. The second one is Meilah is liable even for if it's unintended, and the third one, even if it's unawares. We'll discuss the difference between those levels of negligence or unknowing. Okay, So let's get into it. Mor bered rabana amar hachi ka'amar. Lo im amarta bishar mitzvot shelo asa behen. שאין מתכוון כמתכוון, שמתכוון לחתוך את התלוש וחתך את המחובר שפטור. So the second answer says, regarding other mitzvot, where doing something with intent and without intent is not the same. For example, on Shabbat, if I intended to cut something that was already detached from the ground. So let's say I see a cluster of grapes and in the field, and I think that it's not connected to the ground. And so then that would be permitted. To take one grape would be certainly fine. And so I do that. And afterwards, I realize actually this vine was connected to the ground, and therefore, by plucking the grape, I violated a melacha. So in that case, that would be patur, right? I would not even have to bring a korban. It's less than shogeg. Shogeg is negligent in the sense that I forgot today was Shabbat, or I didn't know that this law was prohibited. Well, those are things you kind of expected to know. You should have known. But this, I knew was Shabbat, and I knew that plucking from the ground is prohibited, but I didn't know that this thing was connected to the ground. And so on Shabbat, we would have that leniency. תאמר במעילה שאם נתכוון להתחמם בגזעי חולין, להתחמם בגזעי עולה שמעל. However, Meilah does not have that leniency. Regarding Meilah, even if you do something without intention, you are still chayav to bring a korban if you did it you have to bring a korban. For example, if I had some wool and I thought the wool was not sacred, just regular wool, and I put it on to keep myself warm, and then all of a sudden someone comes and says, "Oh, I made that hekdesh. That's kodesh wool." So I had no intention, no way of knowing, and so in that case, Meilah, I still have to bring a korban. Because I still use something that was kadosh, and so therefore the kal vachomer does not work. Right, the first kal vachomer, and so I need the pasuk needs to tell me bishkaga perat lamezid, because otherwise I wouldn't know it. Because Meilah has this stringency that even something that's unintended is still liable to bring a korban. And so that's why it has to tell me that even though it has that stringency, nevertheless, if you do it on purpose, you don't bring a korban. Okay, so that's the second answer. The third answer, all these answers are said by fourth generation Amoraim in Bavel. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak amar hachi ka'amar lo. Im amat b'sham mitzvot sheken lo mitchayev behen she'en mit'asek ke-mit'asek. שאם נתכוון להגביה את התלוש וחתך את המחובר שפטור. So regarding other mitzvot, we do not equate someone mit'asek, someone who is doing something completely unaware that is even doing any action. So this is an even more excusable excuse. So, for example, if I see a cluster of grapes on the floor in the field, I pick them up, thinking that they're not attached to the ground. Turns out that they were attached, and by picking them up, now they become detached. See, this is even less, even more excusable than the first one, than the previous case. In the previous case, I was plucking a grape, or I was cutting a stem. Here, I'm not cutting anything at all. I was only lifting, which is just nothing. And so that's mit'asek. Mit'asek is very low level. This is like when you're walking on the street and someone has in their driveway a detector that turns on the light when you walk by. I'm just walking. I have no idea that this is being done totally passively. I'm not even, it's not like I'm even flipping a switch thinking that the switch is not connected or something, or I'm doing nothing. So on Shabbat, that case would be patur totally, would not have to bring a korban. So that's a leniency regarding other commandments like Shabbat, but we're strict regarding Meilah. Tomar be'Meilah shemoshit yado lechlili tol chefetz v'sach yado b'shemen shel kodesh shema'al. Let's say I stick my hand into a jar to get some cookies, and it turns out there happened to be some kodesh oil in the jar, and as I put my hand in, some of that oil goes on my hand, and now I've benefited from anointing from kodesh oil. I was not intense. Not like it's not like there was 2 bottles of oil and I picked the wrong one. I thought this was chulin, but it's actually kodesh. I wasn't even intending to do any anointing at all, just to take something from the kli. And so, yet, even though in other commandments that would be okay, regarding Meilah, if I do that, I still have to bring a korban because I still ended up taking something from Kodesh that I was not that was not allowed to. So therefore, you see that Meilah has the stringency that other commandments do not, and that's why the Torah has to come and specifically say regarding Meilah, although it's so strict in the sense, nevertheless, if you do it on purpose, b'mezid, you don't bring a korban. Okay, that concludes those 3 answers. And now the next topic is, why can't you give chametz as terumah on Pesach? Right, we saw this law already that if I'm, have some bread around and I need to take terumah, it's on Pesach. I can't use chametz as terumah because the kohen can't do anything with it. So we're going to see 2 sources for this law. Amar Mor, we quoted above, במה דברים אמורים במפריש תרומה והחמיסה, אבל המפריש חמץ תרומה, דברי הכל אינה הקדושה. Right, the law that we said above regarding that was the machloket between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, that whole discussion was only if you mafrish terumah. First, I took terumah, and then it became chametz. In other words, I have kosher for Passover wheat flour, which it usually is, and if it didn't get wet, and so I take the flour, I start making dough. The dough is not chametz yet. I'm going to make matzah. And so while I'm doing that, I didn't take terumah. I take terumah, I put this on the side. That terumah is still kasher lePesach. And then if I leave it there, it becomes chametz, that's okay. That is considered terumah. I fulfilled my obligation. But if it's the other way around, hefrish chametz terumah, if I made the dough and I let it become chametz, or if I had chametz lying around and I take terumah from that and I go and give it to the kohen, no, ena kedusha. It is not sacred. The name of terumah does not apply to it. So in other words, I cannot give chametz on Pesach as terumah. Now that's the law. How do we know this? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Amar Kira titen lo ve'lo le'uro. The pasuk regarding terumah says I have to give it to him, meaning I have to give it to him so that he can use it and he can eat it any way he wants. And not I'm giving it to him so he can burn it for his fire, right? I have to give a good gift. What kind of gift is that if you're giving something that's chametz and he wouldn't be able to use it? According to most opinions, he can't get any hana'ah from it. The most lenient, the Rabbi Yosef HaGalili says, okay, he can burn it. But even that is not enough. You have to give it a total gift, one that he can eat. Question about that, is that really true? That the Kohen has to be able to eat it? Maybe he can just get benefit. Metiv Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua. En tormin min hateme'ah latehora. Vim taram beshogeg terumato terumah. So this baraita says that you should try not to give terumah that's tameh to the kohen. If to use teme'ah to exempt tahor. You have 2 piles. I take from the teme'ah and I give it to him. And that will exempt the tahor. You should not do that, the chatechila. But if you did it, it's okay. It is considered terumah. Well, that's the key point. According to this, I can take terumah that's tameh and give it to the kohen, and it is considered terumah, even though the kohen cannot eat it, right? So ve'amai lema lo ve'lo le'uro. Why don't you apply the same that Ashay did before? You have to give it to him and not for his fire. And here, all he could do is burn it in his lamp or in his oven. La kashya hatam hayta lo shata kosher hacha lo hayta lo shata kosher. And so Rav Nachman will answer, there's a difference between these cases. Here in the case of terumah teme'ah, at one time it was fit to be given as terumah. In other words, when I first plucked it off the grain from the ground, it was tahor, right? And then it became tameh afterwards. So at some point it was tahor. When it was tahor, I could have given it to him. So to now it became tameh, but it's still okay because it had a point where it was fitting. But here, regarding chametz, lo hayta la shata kosher, there was never a time when it was fit to give to the kohen. Okay, and then we're going to wonder about this. What do you mean there was never a time? In general, something that's connected to the ground cannot become tameh, and you can't give terumah on it yet. But also, we usually think that if it's connected to the ground, it cannot become hametz, because after all, if it's on the ground, it's gonna rain, right? At some point, it's going to rain. It's going to be dew. Things that outside are going to get wet. So while the hametz is growing, while the wheat is growing, it does not become chametz. So therefore, when I cut the grain, right, then it should be okay. It's not chametz. I could have given it. So chametz also has a time where it's fitting to give. So therefore, what's the distinction here? So what is going on? If the law what kind of case are you talking about where the chametz that you're giving was never had a time when it was fitting? It was always chametz. There is a possibility. Okay, so for example, if it became chametz while it was connected to the ground. So here's a chidush. Wheat can in fact become chametz while it's connected to the ground. Not usually, but if it becomes ripened, if it's totally ripe, it's not getting sustenance from the ground anymore. So it just happens to be connected, but it's not actually biologically getting sustenance. And then at that point, if it gets wet enough, it can actually become chametz. And so here's an example, a case where it cannot be given as terumah yet. You didn't even cut it. You certainly can't make it terumah. And so from even before I cut it, before it has a possibility of being given as terumah, it already becomes chametz, and there was no possibility. All right, fine. So that's a very limited, peculiar case. So that means you're implying about achametz betalush hachinami de kadsha. So according to that, this is old Rav Nachman. Right? According to that, Rav Nachman, you're admitting that if I did cut it while before it was ripe, before it became chametz, and then it became chametz, that I can give it afterwards as terumah. I can. So therefore, I can in most cases give chametz as terumah, because in most cases it becomes chametz after I cut it. Yeah, do you agree with that? Amalein. Yes, indeed, I do agree with that. And this is quite an amazing thing, because it means that the entire statement that we were trying to discuss here before, this was a baraita that says it only applies, you can only give terumah if it became chametz after you gave terumah, but not before. Oh, this is all talking about a case where it became chametz while it was still connected to the ground before I cut it. Well, that's a kind of very unusual case. So everybody's raising their eyebrows at him that he's limiting a baraita to such a peculiar case. And so he sees that they're suspicious. So he quotes a pasuk from Daniel when Daniel when Nebuchadnezzar sees a dream. He says, "Big zerat ayrin pitkamau bemar kadishin she'elta." That he says the matter that Nebuchadnezzar saw is by the decree of watchers, and the sentence by the word of the sacred ones. So Eirin means those who are awake all the time, usually meaning angels, and Kadishin also angels. This message that you got is from the angels. But the rabbi interprets it to talk about sages themselves. V'chen morin bebe midrasha kevati, that the holy ones are the sages, and this is how the rabbis have understood this halacha, and this is in fact what they teach in the Bet Midrash. And so stop being puzzled by this chidush that I just gave you. This is the tradition, and don't ask any questions about it. This comes from on high, literally. Okay, that's very interesting. This pasuk from Daniel is cited in other places, other midrashim, in a similar way. For example, you know the famous midrash about King Shlomo. He reads reading the Torah, and he says, "Oh, don't have many horses, or else you're going to go to Egypt. Don't have much wealth, and so on." He says, "Oh, I know the reason why, so I can do all these things, and I won't fall into the trap." And sure enough, he falls into the trap. And then after that, they quote this pasuk, and says everything Hashem does is with wisdom and understanding. He already consulted the angels about them, and so we can be sure that they have good reasons for them. Don't question them. So here the rabbi is quoting the pasuk in the same way, except that now it's referring not to Hashem's decrees in the Torah, but rather to rabbinic explanations of this rabbinic explanation of a baraita itself. Okay, so that's a very interesting extension of this midrash. All right, very good. So that's one source we said. Now we're going to see a second source. Why would it be that one cannot give terumah, but that is chametz while it's chametz, and give that as terumah, even though the kohen can't eat it? Amar ki ata Rav Huna bered Rav Yoshua amar kera reshit sheshiareh nikarin liYisrael yastazo she'en shiareh nikarin. Pasuk says you have to give reshit, the first, the beginnings, right? Of the produce. So if you have a head, reshit, that implies that the body is separate from the head. There's something different about it. If I'm giving something, usually when you give terumah, then the rest of it you're allowed to eat. So there's some distinction between the two. So there has to be distinction. So reshit means that the leftover, everything else that they did not give as terumah, has to be distinguishable to a Yisrael so that the Yisrael can eat it. However, in this case, if it's all chametz, so now I separated chametz and gave it to the kohen, whatever he's going to do with it. The rest of it, I still can't eat because it's chametz. So actually, there's no distinction between the terumah and the non-terumah because Yisrael cannot eat either of them. And therefore, that's not considered an act of giving terumah if there's no distinction between the terumah and the non-terumah. There's no recognizable difference with the remnant. Okay, so that's it. That's the second source for this law. And now we're going to see something absolutely fascinating: how to take impure grapes that are tameh, and transform them into pure wine that is tahor. Okay, this is going to be a magic transformation. I'll give you 1 second to figure out how to do it. Nope, you didn't figure it out. Okay, here's how you do it. Yetev Rab Acha Bar Avya Kamed Rab Chista Yetev Amar Mishmed Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, so they're telling you the exact setting and who was there. They want to make sure that you know this is an authentic teaching of Rabbi Yochanan, the greatest Amora in Eretz Yisrael. He says, Anavim Shenitmeu Dorchan Pachot Pachot Mikabesa. Okay, there's a law regarding tum'ah that food that is less than a betzah cannot impart tum'ah to other food. Food in any amount or drink in any amount can receive tum'ah if something tameh touches it, but in order to impart tum'ah to something else, has to be at least a kabesa. So therefore, if you have a whole bunch of grapes and they became tameh, what you do is you separate some grapes less than an egg full. How many grapes fit into an egg? Let's say 5. So take 4 grapes and put 4 grapes in a bowl, crush them up, make juice, strain the juice out. In that case, that juice is tahor, even if the peels are tameh. Why? Because alma kasavar mashkin mifkad pikideh. Le'emat kametameh lechisachet lehu. He must believe, he understand that the liquid is contained in a separate receptacle inside the grape, so that when a tumah touches the grape, it only makes tameh the skin, the outside of the grape, but the liquid is its own domain. It's like stored up in a separate storehouse, like like a fetus and a placenta. It's like a separate area, and that doesn't, nothing enters there. And so therefore, if I take a few grapes, that's less, the whole thing is less than a kabetza, and I now smash them. So it's true, the skin is touching the liquid while I'm smashing them, but that's okay, right? When does it become tameh? Only once I'm squeezing them. But while I'm squeezing them, there is no kabesa altogether. And so that grape juice will strain out into another vessel. And now I throw out the grapes, and now everything in that vessel is tahor. I keep doing that again and again, and then I can make wine out of the entire vat of grapes, and that will all be tahor. Brilliant. Okay. Now, one small question on this. Why do you say you have to take less than the betza, right? Why instead of 4 grapes, take 5 grapes, make it an exact kabesa? How's that going to work? If I have an exact kabesa, a kabesa can impart impurity. Well, it still should be okay in this case, because we have a Mishnah in Masechet Tehorot that says, Tememet shesachat zetim v'anabim kabesa mechuvenet tehorim. There's some grapes. Let's say the grapes are tahor, and someone who is tamed lamet, right? He just came from a funeral, and he comes and he takes this egg's worth of volume of grapes, and he squeezes them exactly an egg. Tehorin, it's okay. So you see that even a kabetza itself is permitted. Why do you say you have to take less than a kabetza? There's a good reason. Hatam diavad. Hacha lechatechila. Gezerah dilma tel mevad yoter mekabesa. Over there is only talking about b'diavad. If it happened, then it's okay. But here you're saying you could do it on purpose. If you're doing it on purpose, don't take exactly a kabesa because maybe you'll put a little more. It's hard to figure out exactly. So take a little less and then you'll be sure. Why does it work in this case of the tameh lamet? Well, it works as follows. When, let's explain it now. Amar le Rav Chisda, man sayet lach u'lerbi Yochanan rabach. So Rav Chisda says, who's going to listen to you? That v'chi tumah shebehen lehechan halcha. What do you mean? The tumah just gone? It just went into the disappeared into thin air? It's some kind of magic trick, right? Nobody's going to follow this halacha. Al makasavar mashkin mivla beli'eh. Itmule ochla itmule mashkin. So therefore, you see that Rav Chisda, who argues on this and says, no, this halacha does not work. This trick is not going to work. He must think that liquid is in fact absorbed within the fruit. It's an integral part of the fruit. It's not stored in its own storehouse. And therefore, when the grapes become tameh, the whole thing, the insides also become tameh. And therefore, even if you just take one grape and squeeze it, the tumah is through and through. There's no way to squeeze a grape and get the tumah out. So he disagrees with this whole thing. Okay. Hold on. Do you really not agree at all with the law, that the idea that the liquid is in a separate contained area? How are you going to explain the Mishnah that we just cited? Right? You have these grapes, they're tahor, but someone just came from a funeral, squeezes them a besa's worth, and they're okay. If you say that the liquid inside is a separate storage area, then the whole thing is okay. And when I start squeezing it, right, it becomes less than a besa. So, right, and so everything is tahor. But according to you, you say that the tumah goes through and through. The second the tameh person touches any part of the grape, even the outside, just picks it up, the tumah goes through and through, and it's a kabetza of grapes, and therefore the whole thing will be tameh right from the beginning, even before he starts squeezing it. So how can you explain this Mishnah if you think that the liquid inside is not protected? So Rav Chisda has an answer. We're talking about grapes that were cut and never got wet, right? There's a law that in order for something to receive tum'ah, first it has to get wet. If it was kept dry the entire time, then even if something touches it, tum'ah touches it, it doesn't enter. So so these grapes, when do they first get wet? Only after I start squeezing them. I squeeze a little, the first drop of grape juice comes out onto the front of it, onto the skin, and at that point it can first receive tum'ah. But at that point, it's already less than a kabesa. Kisachet lehu basir lehu shiura. Right, the grapes themselves that would transfer tum'ah to the liquid that now came out. Is less than the kabesa, and therefore cannot send that tumah out to that drop which separated from it. And so, he can explain. Rav Chisda can explain this Mishnah also, and in fact, he thinks this is better. Dila temachi hadetanya ha lemaze domeh. לתרומת תותין וענבים שנטמעה, שאין לו בה לא היתר אכילה ולא היתר הסקה. Rav Chisda says, I in fact have a proof for my opinion. This braita, which we mentioned yesterday, that said that if you give chametz, that's tameh, chametz to as terumah, it's similar to giving berries or grapes that became tameh, because they cannot be eaten since they're terumah teme'ah, and they cannot be used as fuel because berries you don't burn, nor do grapes burn, and therefore they have no use. Now, according to you, you have this magic solution, right? According to you and Rabbi Yochanan, your teacher, so you could take these grapes and you can take them piece by piece, right? Less than a kabesa, squeeze them, get the juice, make wine, and you can that wine will be tahor. So according to you, there is no similarity to chametz that you give as terumah to this, and there's no reason to say it has no heter achila and no heter asaka. You could eat it. You could turn these tameh grapes into tahor wine. And you see, the Braita doesn't say that, so therefore I am right, and the liquid inside does not get stored up inside. Okay, but before we see the answer, in this statement, you have the word zetim. In printed editions, the word zetim is printed, but it's in parentheses, which means it should be removed. In fact, if we look at manuscripts of this, we see that no manuscripts have the word zetim. In the first printing in 1520 by Daniel Bomberg, the word zetim got in there, and they continued into later printings, but then an editor realized that they shouldn't be there and didn't erase it, but put it in parentheses. So it's obvious that the word zetim should not be there, and they can't be there because olives are fuel, right? You can turn olives into olive oil and burn them, and burn it and use it as for light. So it wouldn't make sense to have zetim there.
Are parentheses a common thing?
Yes, throughout the Vilna Shas, whenever you see parentheses, it means that the latest editors wanted you to remove those words. When you see brackets, it means they wanted to add those words, but they don't want to erase it altogether because that's too big of a change. So they put in parentheses to say we think that these words are mistaken. But in each case, you should actually check the manuscripts to see if that emendation fits with all manuscripts, some manuscripts. Sometimes it's only some. In this case, it's all. So therefore, it's clear that zetim should not be there. Okay, anyway, back to Rabbi Yochanan. How is he going to explain this baraita, right? Why can't you use this magic formula and take these grapes and make them tahor? Why can't you donate them? Why'd you say that there's no heter achila? Amarava gezera dilmate behuli de takala. The problem is that you cannot donate grapes that are tameh because the Kohen receiving them may eat them, right? And so he's not going to be so careful to go and squeeze them little by little and all that. I mean, technically it's possible to do, but if he's not going to do it, he might not do it, and he might forget, and this is a stumbling block for him, and that's why it's not a good. So technically there is a way, but it's a very difficult way, and so don't put a stumbling block before him, and that's the reason. Okay, wait, do we worry about that the Kohen is not going to be so careful and it's going to be a stumbling block? One is allowed to, a Kohen is allowed to take bread or oil that became tameh, it's terumah. The Kohen is allowed to light it. So it means you can give bread to Kohen and he can burn it for heat. Amale. So how come you don't say, oh, well, don't give it to him? He shouldn't be allowed to use it because he might come to take a piece of it and eat it, right? Because after all, it's food. No, we don't say that. And shemen also, he could put it on his salad. He might eat it. We don't say that. No, the reason we don't worry in those cases is different. Pat sadik le ben ha'esim shemen shel terumah rameh le bechli ma'us. If a kohen receives bread that is tameh, what he should do is he should throw it with the firewood, and it'll become all disgusting. And then it's repulsive, and he's not going to want to eat it. Also, if you have oil that is terumah and becomes tameh, then the Kohen should put it in a vessel that's repulsive, and no one will want to eat it, drink it anymore, and so then no one will come to a mistake and use it for eating. It's clear that that will only be used for burning. And so that's the difference of opinion here. That's how Rava can explain this the same source, whereas the Rava's opinion was not so, that that this cannot be given, because once it's tameh, there's nothing to do with it. If it's berries or if it's grapes, there's no way to make tameh grapes, make them tahor. Halacha l'maaseh here is, according to the Yochanan, this is a viable option. This is a way that, and it was done throughout history in different cases, that you can take tameh grapes and squeeze them into tahor wine. An amazing method. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.